Imagine standing alone on a dusty trail with danger closing in behind you, your breath shaking, your hope fading, and the sound of hooves your only prayer for rescue. Now imagine the man who arrives is not the kind who takes advantage, but the kind who stands between you and the darkness. A cowboy whose code is stronger than fear, and whose presence can change the end of your story in a single heartbeat. Before we dive into this powerful frontier tale, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who loves Western stories, and drop a comment below telling us what kind of tale you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps these stories alive. All right, settle in, because this one begins with a moment that changed everything. Let's start the story. The storm clouds crawled across the evening sky as the dusty trail stretched endlessly ahead, broken only by the shuffle of tired hooves. Jake Rourke rode steady, hat pulled low, eyes sharp beneath the brim as the wind carried a strange, thin cry. He tightened his reins and listened again. There it was, faint, desperate, and close enough to raise the hairs on his neck. A cowboy didn't ignore a cry on the trail, not in country this unforgiving. He turned his horse toward the sound, urging the animal forward as the cry grew louder, trembling with fear he could almost feel. He found her by the broken fence post, dust on her face, clothes torn, legs scraped raw by sagebrush. She stood with her thumb out, trembling, trying to flag down someone who might stop, someone who might not be the kind that put that fear in her eyes to begin with. When she saw Jake, she straightened, brushing the dirt off her palms as if to look less desperate. Her voice shook as she whispered for a ride, offering anything, offering everything, the way only someone truly cornered might. Jake's jaw tightened. This land bred desperation, but hearing her voice tremble like that struck something deep in him. She kept insisting, eyes full of panic, as if she believed kindness no longer existed in men. He listened, but his eyes swept the terrain, studying the bushes, checking for movement, for whoever had pushed her to this point. When he finally spoke, his tone held steel and steadiness, the grounded certainty of a man carved by hardship but still driven by principle. He told her she didn't owe him anything, not a thing. When she didn't believe him, when she kept repeating her offer like a shield, his anger simmered, not at her, but at whoever had taught her fear so thoroughly. He dismounted, boots crunching against the gravel, and held out his hand, slow and deliberate. She hesitated, eyes darting to the open land behind them, as if danger still crouched somewhere in the shadows. Jake didn't push. He simply stepped closer, lifted her gently, and placed her on his horse, his voice low as he said the words she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. "You're safe now." Her shoulders dropped the moment she settled into the saddle, as though the words had peeled away a layer of fear she'd been carrying for miles. Jake stood by the horse's side a moment longer, scanning the ridgeline. A trail of footprints, uneven and hurried, led into the brush. Beside them, heavier boot prints dug deeper, angrier. Someone had chased her. Someone still might. Jake swung back into the saddle behind her, keeping his tone calm while every instinct in him sharpened like a drawn blade. He told her to breathe, to keep her eyes forward, to trust the horse beneath her. She finally whispered her name, Emma, and the story spilled out in broken pieces between sobs. Her wagon had splintered a mile back, axles snapped clean. A man who'd stopped to help turned out to be something far worse than a stranger. He'd chased her into the field when she fought him off, threatening what every woman feared alone on a frontier road. She'd run until her lungs gave out, praying for any soul to come by. Jake felt rage roll through him, cold and precise. This wasn't the kind of threat a man rode away from. This was the kind a man confronted. They traveled at a steady trot, but Jake kept looking back, studying the shifting silhouette of the horizon. Dusk was settling fast, smothering the landscape in violet and rust. Coyotes howled in the distance, but that wasn't what tightened Jake's chest. It was the echo of a single horse's hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable, carrying a rhythm that didn't belong to the wilderness. Someone was following. He told Emma not to look back. Fear made noise, and noise fed danger. Instead, he whispered reassurance, grounding her with every word, while preparing himself for what might come charging out of the dark. The trail forked ahead, one path toward town, the other toward the canyon where shadows swallowed anything foolish enough to travel blind. Jake chose neither. Instead, he veered off the road entirely, getting the horse through brush where hooves made muted thumps instead of ringing against packed dirt. He hoped the cover of sage and scattered pines would give them an edge. Emma trembled, gripping the saddle horn, but Jake kept one arm around her, steadying her, letting her know she wasn't running alone anymore. He'd seen fear like hers before, and he'd never left it unanswered. Behind them, the hoofbeats grew louder, no longer distant, now pursuing. Jake cursed under his breath. Whoever was chasing didn't fear being found, he wanted to be. Jake urged the horse faster, weaving through thick brush as branches whipped past them. Emma pressed against him, breathing hard, fighting panic that clawed its way back into her chest. Jake leaned close, voice firm as a promise. He told her that the moment she climbed onto his horse, the rules of the trail changed. She wasn't prey anymore. She wasn't alone. She was under his protection, and he intended to keep her there. As they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow pass, Jake pulled the horse to a halt. Wind whipped through the canyon, carrying dust in twisting spirals. He listened, silence, then the unmistakable rhythm of pursuit drawing nearer. Emma tried to speak, voice shaking, but Jake placed a slow, reassuring hand on hers. He dismounted, tightening the cinch strap, preparing for confrontation. When he looked into the dark beyond the ridge, he wasn't afraid. He was ready. He promised her again, calm, certain, unwavering, that no one would touch her, no one would lay a finger on her, not while he still breathed. The wind shifted, carrying the dry scent of horses and sweat long before the figure emerged from the darkening horizon. Jake stood still, one hand on his revolver, the other resting lightly against the saddle to keep Emma calm. His horse snorted, uneasy, sensing the tension building in the air like static before lightning. Emma clutched the saddle horn, her breath unsteady, but Jake gave her a gentle nod that told her to trust him. He had no intention of letting fear rule this ground tonight. Whoever was coming had already taken too much from her. The rider came into view at last, slowing as he spotted Jake silhouetted against the rocks. He was a broad man with a cruel smirk carved across his dusty face. His shirt was torn at the sleeve, evidence of Emma's struggle. The man's eyes flicked from Jake to the woman trembling on the horse, and satisfaction curled across his mouth like poison. He tipped his chin arrogantly and called out that she belonged to him. Jake didn't raise his voice, didn't step forward. He simply stated that the trail didn't belong to men who hunted women, and neither did Emma. The stranger laughed, as if hearing a good joke. The man dismounted in a sloppy, overconfident swagger. He boasted loudly that he'd finish what he'd started before Jake interfered. Each step he took echoed with arrogance, echoing through the canyon. Emma shrunk back, but Jake stood calm and rooted. His hand hovered just inches from his holster, patience simmering in the tightening of his jaw. He repeated, slower this time, that the man would turn around, mount his horse, and ride away. But the stranger didn't listen. Instead, he lunged, reaching for Jake's throat, drunken courage and rage twisting his face. Jake's gun didn't appear suddenly. It materialized as smooth and natural as breath. A single movement, sharp and precise, echoed through the canyon as he drew and fired a warning shot into the dirt at the man's feet. The stranger froze, mouth falling open, dust lifting around his boots. Jake warned him again, his voice now edged with steel and finality. Emma covered her mouth, trembling, as she watched the man's bravado crack. But the stranger wasn't ready to surrender. He reached for his own weapon, thinking he could outdraw a seasoned cowboy. He couldn't. Jake fired again, not killing him, but sending the bullets slashing through the stranger's hand. The man screamed, dropping his gun, stumbling backward. Jake stepped forward, holding his revolver firmly, keeping it aimed at the ground but close enough to make his meaning clear. He told the man there'd be no third shot and no more chances. The stranger's eyes darted wildly, fear swallowing every ounce of his arrogance. He scrambled toward his horse, clutching his bleeding hand. He mounted clumsily, spitting curses as he turned and fled into the dark, disappearing into the canyon like a wounded coyote. The echoes of his retreat faded slowly, leaving only the sigh of the wind and the soft rustle of sage. Emma sagged forward, overwhelmed. Jake holstered his weapon and reached up to steady her. She clung to him for a long moment before whispering a shaky thank you. He told her it was done, that the man wouldn't be back tonight, maybe not ever. But he watched the horizon one more time to be sure. The sky had deepened into a midnight blue, stars flickering awake above them. Jake knew traveling in the dark was dangerous, but staying put after that confrontation was even worse. He lifted Emma gently to adjust her seat and swung into the saddle behind her. With a soft command, he nudged the horse toward safer ground. The journey through the night was slow and cautious. Emma leaned back against him, exhaustion taking hold. Jake spoke quietly now and then, pointing out familiar landmarks, anything to keep her mind anchored somewhere safer than the memory she carried. She asked why he'd helped her, why he'd risked himself for a stranger. Jake answered simply that right was right, wrong was wrong, and a man's worth on the trail wasn't measured by how fast he drew his gun, but by whether he stood between harm and the helpless. His voice felt like solid ground beneath her, steadying her breaths. Hours later, the first warm flicker of lantern light appeared in the distance. The small settlement lay quiet under the stars, its wooden buildings glowing soft and welcoming. As they approached, dogs barked and a few curious faces peered from windows. Jake led the horse straight to the doctor's house. Inside, Emma was examined while Jake waited outside, packing the porch with restless energy. When the doctor finally stepped out and said she would be all right with rest, Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Relief washed over him like rain. Emma emerged with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes met Jake's, soft with gratitude that carried far more weight than words. She asked what she was supposed to do now. He told her that once she'd rested, he'd take her the rest of the way to her brother in Red Bluff. She stared at him in disbelief, asking whether he truly intended to ride that distance on her behalf. Jake nodded as if it were the simplest decision in the world. Responsibility didn't end when the danger did. He believed that deeply. The dawn came gently, washing the settlement in gold. Emma stepped onto the porch, looking steadier than the night before. Jake waited by his horse, adjusting the saddle. She approached him slowly, her voice soft as she said she'd never forget what he'd done. Jake tipped his hat, replying that she didn't need to remember him, just remember that not all men on the trail meant harm. She hesitated, then asked if she'd ever see him again after reaching Red Bluff. He paused, offering a small smile that held miles of unspoken possibility. The trail was long, he said. Paths crossed more often than folks realized. They set off together, leaving the settlement behind as sunlight stretched across the open land. The road ahead was long, but for the first time since her ordeal began, Emma felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Safety, hope, and the quiet certainty that some strangers arrive in your life not to take something from you, but to give back what was stolen. Jake guided the horse forward, steady as ever, and Emma held on, not out of fear anymore, but trust. Their journey wasn't over, but the worst had passed, and for the first time in days, Emma allowed herself to breathe freely again. Their silhouettes moved across the rising horizon, a cowboy and a woman whose path he'd altered forever, riding toward a future neither of them had expected when the day began. The frontier was wild, unpredictable, and often unkind, but every now and then it revealed one of its rarest treasures, a good man.